Hello and welcome to this video on influences on Parliament, which goes with the video on the Law Commission and law reform, both of which are from the AQA Paper 2 paper. So in the video I'm going to look at the part of the specification under parliamentary lawmaking which talks about the influences on Parliament and the advantages and disadvantages of influences on parliamentary lawmaking. And if you're a politics student, there is quite a lot of crossover here, so you'll be able to use some of your knowledge from the politics specification. So there are three influences that you need to know about: political influence, public opinion and the media, and pressure groups. So we'll start by looking at political influence, and this is one of the most important influences on Parliament because most of the people in Parliament belong to a political party. And before a general election, all of the parties will publish a manifesto. And a manifesto is simply a list of promises of the things that they will do if they are elected. So it's like their advertisement to the public to say what they'll do and to try and get people to vote for them. So then you'll have the general election and everyone will vote for an MP, and the party with the most MPs forms the government, meaning that they have a majority of MPs in the House of Commons, and so they can outvote everybody else, and this means that they can take their political agenda and get laws passed that they want to. And their programme will be announced in the King's Speech. The influence is demonstrated by the number of government bills that are passed each year, around 30 to 40. And this shows that government has a lot of success in getting their laws onto the statute book. But even smaller parties can have an influence. For example, a Green Party MP can ask a question in Parliament, or an individual MP can introduce a private member's bill, and some of the most important pieces of legislation have come about as a private member's bill, for example, the Abortion Act 1967. So that would be enough to explain political influence, but you also need to be able to evaluate it, which means to look at the positives and negatives of political influence. So the advantages are that each political party will have its proposals for reform ready because they'll have thought them through and put them in their manifesto. And if the party has a sensible majority, then they can make the process efficient because no one is going to be able to outvote them. However, the disadvantages are that if you keep voting in different governments, then they may disagree with the previous government and repeal their laws, which is costly. It also means that if you've only got a small majority, such as when Theresa May was in power, you may not be able to pass the laws that you actually want without trying to get some of the smaller parties on board. And a coalition like the one between the Lib Dems and the Conservatives between 2010 and 2015 will mean that compromise is needed and that you may have to water down proposals in order to get the other party on board. So now I want to look at media influence, and the media is defined as the channels through which information is transmitted to the public. And you can see that this can be through television, radio, social media, websites, the print media, and online. All of these things are part of the media. And obviously there is a strong link to the public and public ideas about who they might want to vote for, and so these are closely linked. This is just a little exercise about the Sun and elections. The Sun newspaper previously had a print circulation of upwards of 4 million and considered itself to be very influential. It campaigned against Neil Kinnock, the Labour leader on the left there, in 1992, I think, and the Conservatives went on to win the election. And then they said it's the Sun what won it in their headline. They then changed allegiances, and in 1997 they supported Tony Blair and Labour won. But then when Gordon Brown became leader, they removed their support from Labour again. And then you can see that in the 2019 election, they supported Boris Johnson, who went on to win the election. And they would say that they were influential in making people decide how to vote. Other examples of media influence are the Dunblane shooting that we're going to look at a little bit later, This is a really good example because it can be used under each of the headings, really, because it was an example of a manifesto promise. So when we were looking at political influence, it's an example of a manifesto promise because in 1997, the Labour Party included it in their manifesto that they would ban all handguns following the massacre of 16, 5 and 6-year-olds and their teacher at Dunblane. And then they went on to pass the Firearms Act in 1997 once they were elected. So it crosses over. It also crosses over into media because the media put a lot of effort into publicising this atrocity, and they did TV interviews and radio interviews, and it kept the matter in the public eye. And also other pressure from the pressure group, the Snowdrop campaign, which we'll see in a moment, was also influential. Another example of media influence is the campaign that started with the Daily Telegraph that they ran into the MP's expenses scandal. You can see on that headline there that this included MPs spending money on things like duck houses. And media pressure there led to reform of the system as to what expenses MPs could claim. And this was enacted in the Parliamentary Standards Act 2009. And there are lots and lots of different examples, and you may have many others that you've looked at. But Natasha's Law is another recent one where Natasha had bought a sandwich at a pret-a-manger which wasn't labelled, and she had a sesame allergy, and she sadly died. But her parents had campaigned for better food labelling of allergens on pre-packed sandwiches, and that came into force in 2019. So to look at the advantages and disadvantages of media influence, the advantages are that the media can raise public awareness of an issue and they can keep it in the public eye, which can generate a lot of public support. And obviously with public support, if the public see that a particular party is going to do what they want them to do, then they may be more likely to vote for them. And the media can support the work of pressure groups, and we'll look at the Snowdrop campaign in a minute, and they can work together really well. Disadvantages are that they may create a panic, causing a knee-jerk reaction, and the Law on Dangerous Dogs is often cited as an example of this, that there was a media frenzy over small children being attacked by dogs, and it led the legislation to be ill thought through and not very well drafted when it was introduced in the Dangerous Dogs Act of 1991, and it subsequently needed amending. Another disadvantage is the media may represent a small percentage of the population, but they can make a lot of noise. And also that the media manipulate the news and create public opinion. And a recent piece of research showed that 20% of TikTok news videos contained false or misleading claims. So this is an increasing worry about where people are getting news information from. Lastly, pressure groups. There are two sorts of pressure group. Sectional pressure groups try to represent the interests of a particular section of society, and membership's restricted to that section of society. So the National Union of Journalists, you have to be a journalist to join. By contrast, cause pressure groups have open membership from the public because they're promoting a cause. So anyone that supports that cause can join. So, for example, Friends of the Earth, which is concerned with protecting the environment, anyone that's interested in the environment can join Friends of the Earth. There are a variety of tactics used by pressure groups to try and get their viewpoint across and to try and encourage Parliament and government to listen to them. These are divided into insider and outsider. Insider tends to be more formal processes like putting things in writing, responding to consultations, having meetings, lobbying, which is named after the small corridors in Parliament, which is where they try and influence individual MPs, and petitions. Whereas things that are more like demonstration and protest can tip over into outsider tactics. So people at pressure groups that don't have such a close relationship with government. And you can see that there, this was one of the Just Stop Oil protests where somebody disrupted the snooker world championship by putting paint on the table. And obviously that's criminal damage. And so those sorts of tactics are those of an outsider group. So this confirms insiders have close links with government and they tend to be consulted about legislation, whereas outsider groups often take action which the government would approve of, and this may even be civil disobedience or direct action, and can even amount to a crime. So a little look at a particular pressure group, the Snowdrop Campaign. This followed the Dunblane massacre, and the pressure group was formed to campaign for a ban on handguns. 705,000 people signed the petition presented to Parliament, and that was in the days where people actually physically signed it. It wasn't an electronic petition. They actually cut a piece out of a newspaper and signed it and sent it in. The campaign used the media wisely to do interviews, to try and publicise their cause and keep it in the public eye. One of the survivors spoke at the Labour Party conference in a very emotional speech, and it was included in the Labour Party manifesto in 1997 that they, if elected, would ban all handguns, and this is what happened subsequently in the Firearms Act 1997. Other examples of pressure groups, and again there are loads of these, but Stonewall, who are a cause pressure group, campaigned on the equalising of the age of consent in 2000, and the League Against Cruel Sports, again a cause pressure group, campaigned to pass the Hunting Act 2004 to ban hunting with dogs. And that is a good example, the Hunting Act 2004, also of the limitation on the power of House of Lords, because the House of Lords voted against that act, but under the Parliament Acts of 1911 and 1949, they can only delay legislation for a year, and then it can be reintroduced and passed by the House of Commons in the next session. So looking at these influences in terms of advantages and disadvantages of pressure groups, the advantages are they can raise public awareness of a wide range of issues. They are experts, so people that join these groups have a lot of expertise in their topics. So if you're in Friends of the Earth or Greenpeace, you have a lot of expertise on environmental issues. And if you're in an insider group, then you're likely to have access to important decision makers and maybe local MPs, etc. However, they are possibly undemocratic because they may not represent the majority view, but they are a loud minority. And two groups may even disagree with each other. And clearly, as we saw with some of the Just Stop Oil protests and other protests where people have glued themselves to things and disrupted other events, then outsider groups can use undesirable and illegal tactics. So this is a multiple choice question. You sometimes will find these sorts of questions. Proposed new legislation affecting the whole of the country, but which is promoted by a minority interest group, is most likely to be brought to Parliament as. So this doesn't look like an influencers question, but it actually is. And you've got 4 choices there to have a think about. And it says it affects the whole of the country. So that could only be A, a government bill, or C, a private member's bill, as a private bill only affects an individual or company. It's not a white paper, as that is a consultation paper issued before a bill and after a green paper. So you've got the choice then, and the answer is a private member's bill because it says it's a minority interest group, and it wouldn't be a minority interest group for a government bill. It would be most likely to be something that had been brought to an individual MP, and they had agreed that if they were successful in the ballot, for example, that they would bring the bill forward. And that could be, the minority interest group could be a pressure group. So that is the link there. This question is about pressure groups and which of the following statements is false. Cause pressure groups promote particular beliefs or principles is true. Pressure groups often lobby individual MPs in order to promote their ideas is true. And D, sectional pressure groups represent the interests of a group of people is also true. So the answer is B, that pressure groups always put forward candidates for election to Parliament in order to promote their ideas. They don't do that, that is political parties. It's less likely for pressure groups that would be to put people forward for election. They're trying to influence the people that are elected. So other types of question other than multiple choice are the explain and assess questions in the AQA exam. So explain how parliamentary lawmaking is influenced by the media. Give an example of a change in the law that was influenced by the media for 5 marks. And a 7-mark question, assess the influence of the media in influencing parliamentary lawmaking. This would be worth 7 marks in a question 11, or it could just ask you for the advantages or disadvantages of the media. So when you were answering that question, you would need to try, if it was just advantages, to have 3 advantages with some evidence, 3 disadvantages if it just wanted disadvantages, or if it was just an assess, then you could have a mixture, 2 advantages and 1 disadvantage, or the other way around. But the most common mistake is to miss out the 7-mark part, so make sure you definitely don't miss out the 7-mark part. So you could use any of the ones we looked at earlier, but try and link them to examples where possible. So, for example, on the advantages, linking to the Snowdrop campaign, and on the disadvantages, maybe linking to the dangerous dogs legislation. So I hope that's been a useful, quick review of influences on Parliament. Thanks very much.